I'm several months postpartum and I've had no libido. I was hoping it would get better with time, but my libido is still non-existent. It's probably because I'm breastfeeding, but I didn't want to stop that just to increase my libido. My husband and I have pretty good communication, though I know it has some areas that still need work. Though I do feel comfortable talking to him about pretty much anything. Knowing that he has needs that aren't entirely being met due to my lacking libido, I decided that I wanted to make my husband happy and told him that we can be intimate whenever he likes. He asked if I wanted to. I told him I can't really make myself be in the mood, but making him happy makes happy, so that's what I get out of it. I have no idea why, but this made him upset. He said he doesn't want intimacy to be a chore for me, just some checkbox to fill for the day. I've tried explaining that making him happy is what I want, but I don't think he got what I meant and just took this as, I'm never going to be in the mood again. I feel like I literally can't win in this situation. It makes me question if I should have just stayed quiet about it all, even though he constantly asks if I'm in the mood. I don't want to lie to him, so I thought this would be the best option. How can I get my point across properly? Now for an update and adding comment for clarification. The comment, thanks to everyone for the advice and perspective. 1. I just want to clarify that no, I'm not a lifeless corpse in bed, nor would it be like rapping me, DUTF. This is also not a pity frick. I usually enjoy intimacy after we start. I just don't want to have to constantly say that, yes, I have already told him that. All of this was to tell him that I may not be in the mood when you ask, but I will be during. Sorry that I didn't clarify that too. I agree that intimacy is only part of intimacy. I know I need to work on showing physical affection outside of intimacy. It can just be difficult when I feel so touched out on a daily basis, so it tends to take a back seat in my brain. Any suggestions on what I can implement to help with that? To add, I spoke with my husband to clarify that I do still desire him, even if my libido makes it seem otherwise. I also apologize for the poor wording. The comments saying that he probably just wants me, but also wants me to want him, were true. So I'm going to work on initiating even when I don't necessarily feel like it. No, I won't be just laying there. I fully intend to participate. I hope the number of times I enjoy it after we start will increase as I go. I also plan to talk with my obstetrician about it to see if there's anything else I can do. Now for a few comments before the update. Comment 1. Info. Do you get in the mood or want it after he initiates with foreplay? After I had my daughter for a long time, I had responsive desire. Literally, intimacy was never on my mind. I didn't crave it and honestly would have just not had it at all if my partner never initiated. However, once he would initiate it, I would get in the mood. I just needed to get going to want it. Instead of saying, I don't want intimacy, but I'll do it for you, I basically told him right now, while intimacy is not actively on my mind. If you initiate and start with foreplay, I do want it. I don't know if that's the case you're having, but if so, it will probably feel better if it's explained to him that way, rather than him feeling like you're just laying down for him to do his thing. It took me about a year or so for me to feel closer to normal libido-wise. Comment 2. 1. Nobody is being an AH here. You're battling your hormones and feel like your husband is getting taken out in the crossfire. He is battling it with you. 2. It will take time for you to settle out, especially because you're still breastfeeding. 3. The intimacy he's talking about is that feeling of being locked into intimacy with your partner, totally on the same mental page without talking. This may take some time. Not just getting a nut off. Finally, this is normal in my opinion. Some women just aren't there mentally yet, and that's okay. You just grew a human and are trying to make sure it is growing okay. Just remember your husband is asking for a mental connection, not a physical one. He just doesn't know how to say it. Now for the update. Hey everyone, thanks for all the comments and advice from the last post. So after I spoke with my husband to clarify everything, we had a pretty good talk. He seemed to understand where I was coming from a bit better, and I felt like we were on the same page. But then, something happened that really changed things for us. A couple of days ago, we were having dinner when my husband got a call from his best friend. I could tell from his face that it was serious. After he hung up, he told me that his friend's wife had just left him. Apparently, she'd been feeling neglected and unappreciated for a long time, and she finally had enough. This hit my husband hard because he realized that he might be making me feel the same way, even if it wasn't intentional. That night, he sat me down and told me how scared he was of losing me. He said he didn't want our relationship to end up like his friends. This was a huge moment for him because he's usually not very open about his feelings. It made me see that he really does care about our relationship and wants to make it work. The next day, we decided to take a day off from everything and just focus on each other. We spent the day talking, laughing, and just being together. It was like we were reconnecting on a deeper level. We also talked about how we could improve our intimacy without making it feel like a chore. We agreed to try new things and be more spontaneous. One thing we decided to do was to have a weekly date night. We realized that we had been so caught up in our daily routines that we forgot to make time for each other. Our first date night was simple, but meaningful. We cooked dinner together, watched a movie, and just enjoyed each other's company. It felt like we were dating again, and it was exactly what we needed. But then, something unexpected happened. During our second date night, I started to feel a bit more in the mood. It wasn't like a switch had flipped, but I felt more connected to him, and that made a difference. We ended up being intimate, and it was one of the best experiences we've had in a long time. It made me realize that maybe my lack of libido wasn't just about breastfeeding or being postpartum. It was also about feeling disconnected and stressed. The next day, I decided to talk to my obstetrician about everything. She was really understanding and gave me some great advice. She suggested that I try to find ways to reduce my stress and take care of myself. She also recommended some exercises and techniques to help improve my libido. I felt hopeful after talking to her, and I decided to give it a try. Over the next few days, I started to implement some of the suggestions. I made an effort to take some time for myself each day, even if it was just a few minutes. I also started doing some of the exercises my obstetrician recommended. It wasn't easy, but I could feel a difference. I felt more relaxed and less stressed, which made a big difference in my overall mood. One evening, while we were putting our baby to bed, my husband surprised me with a small gift. It was a necklace with a pendant that had our baby's birthstone. He told me that he wanted to give me something to remind me of how much he loves and appreciates me. It was such a sweet gesture, and it made me feel so loved. That night, we had another deep conversation. My husband opened up about his fears and insecurities, and I did the same. We talked about how we could support each other better and make our relationship stronger. It was a really emotional conversation, but it brought us even closer. As we continued to work on our relationship, I started to notice a change in myself. I felt more connected to my husband, and my libido started to improve. It wasn't a drastic change, but it was a step in the right direction. I also started to feel more confident and less stressed, which made a big difference in our intimacy. Looking back, I realized that a lot of my issues were related to feeling disconnected and stressed. By taking the time to reconnect with my husband and take care of myself, I was able to improve my libido and our relationship. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it. I also learned a lot about my husband during this time. I realized that he has his own fears and insecurities, and that he really does care about our relationship. It made me appreciate him even more, and made me want to work even harder to make our relationship stronger. So, that's where we are now. We're still working on things, but we're in a much better place than we were before. We're more connected, more understanding, and more in love. It's been a challenging journey, but it's brought us closer together. Thanks for reading and for all the support. Am I the idiot for leaving my unsupportive husband and staying at my sister's while pregnant? I, 29-year-old female, need to vent and get some advice. I have always been an emotional person. I even cry when I'm frustrated, overwhelmed, and even just angry. When my husband, 31-year-old male, and I first got together, he seemed to understand this about me. He was patient, comforting, and supportive whenever I cried, no matter the reason. But over time, that understanding has faded, and now he often dismisses my feelings by comparing me to the boy who cried wolf. He thinks that because he never cries, my reasons for crying must be trivial or exaggerated. It's his way of saying that I cry over nothing, and when something truly serious, as if me crying when I'm genuinely upset doesn't count, happens, he won't believe it. Now that I'm pregnant, my emotions have been even more intense. The hormones make me cry even more frequently, and I feel more vulnerable than ever. Instead of being more supportive during this time, my husband casually ignores me and tells me he is giving me space until I calm down. It feels like he's putting me in a timeout. There have been times when I've been emotionally hurt, and his reaction is to roll his eyes or tell me I'm overreacting. For example, the other day I was overwhelmed by everything going on and started crying. He just walked away saying, "I'll give you space until you calm down," as if I was throwing a tantrum. Another time, we had a really bad argument, and he yelled at me for being worried about a health issue, and it made me cry because he didn't take my concerns seriously and thought I was being dramatic. I feel so invalidated and misunderstood. Just because I cry more often than he does, doesn't mean my feelings are any less real or important. I've tried explaining this to him, but he still insists that my frequent crying makes it hard for him to tell when something is genuinely wrong. As if any time I cry, it's over something stupid, when it isn't. This just makes me so angry that he thinks he can pick and choose, when my crying is something to be taken seriously. Yes, I'm an emotional person, but I'm not an idiot. My therapist tells me I am emotionally healthy, and I can regulate my emotions well. I'm not handicapped, I'm normal. But my husband doesn't agree with her. I know I'm probably extra emotional and sensitive right now, especially now with the pregnancy, but I just want to feel supported and understood. How can I get through to him? Has anyone else experienced something similar? How did you handle it? Thanks for listening. Now for a few comments before the update. Comment 1. Maybe work out a system. Keep crying as often as you do, but when you feel it's something really, really bad, have some sort of a code word, like apple if it's average crying and banana if it's serious crying. So now every time you cry, just say either apple or banana, and your husband will know how to triage the comforting. I think his frustration comes from a place where he's genuinely worried about how he will ever know if something is really, really wrong. Explain the system to him. Go back to your crying. And next time it happens, he'll ask apple or banana. Most likely it will be apple like 90% of the time, and then he can feel comforted knowing the appropriate level of comfort he needs to give. It will most likely be a huge relief for him. Give it a try. Comment 2. I'm curious, how often do you cry when you're frustrated, overwhelmed, or just angry? Is it a couple of times a day? The reason I ask, how does your husband know what is hormonal and what is normal crying? And specifically, what do you expect from him? I get the sense that there isn't a lot of communication between the two of you, and now it's all raw emotions. The two of you need to talk because once the baby arrives, it's not going to be easier. Being hormonal now is giving you a glimpse of what is coming later. Now for the update. Thanks for all the comments from my last post. So this past week has been a real mess, and I need to get it off my chest. It all started when I had a doctor's appointment for the baby. I was already feeling anxious because it was a checkup to see if everything was progressing well. My husband was supposed to come with me, but he said he had an important meeting at work and couldn't make it. I was upset, but I tried to understand. I went alone and everything was fine with the baby, but I felt so alone. When I got home, I told him how I felt, and he just shrugged it off, saying, "It's just a routine checkup. Why are you making a big deal out of it?" That hurt a lot. A couple of days later, we had a small gathering with some friends. I was already feeling overwhelmed with everything, and during the gathering, one of our friends made a joke about how emotional pregnant women can be. Everyone laughed, including my husband. I felt humiliated and went to the bathroom to cry. When I came out, my husband asked if I was okay, but in that tone that made it clear he thought I was overreacting. I told him I felt embarrassed, and he just said, "It's just a joke. You need to lighten up." The next day, things escalated. I was feeling really down and decided to talk to him about how unsupported I felt. I tried to explain that I needed him to be more understanding, especially now. He got defensive and said, "I can't be walking on eggshells all the time. You need to toughen up." That was the last straw for me. I told him I couldn't keep doing this and that I needed some space to think. He just rolled his eyes and walked away. I decided to stay at my sister's place for a few days to clear my head. She was very supportive and listened to everything I had to say. It felt good to be heard and understood. While I was there, I started thinking about our relationship and how things had changed. I remembered how he used to be so caring and patient. I wondered what had happened to that person. One night, while I was at my sister's, I got a call from my husband. He sounded upset and said he missed me and wanted me to come home. I told him I needed more time, and he got angry, saying I was being dramatic and that I needed to stop running away from our problems. I hung up the phone, feeling more confused than ever. The next day, my sister and I had a long talk. She reminded me of a time when we were kids, and I had a meltdown because I lost my favorite toy. She said I had always been emotional, but that didn't make my feelings any less valid. She told me I deserved to be with someone who understood and supported me, especially during such a vulnerable time. I decided to go back home and try to talk to my husband one more time. When I got there, he was waiting for me. We sat down and I told him how I felt. I told him I needed him to be more supportive and understanding, especially now. He listened, but I could tell he was getting frustrated. He said, "I don't know how to deal with this. You're always crying, and I don't know when it's serious or not." I felt like I was hitting a wall. I told him I couldn't keep feeling this way, and that we needed to find a way to make things work. He suggested we go to couples therapy, but I could tell he wasn't really into the idea. He said, "I'll do it if it makes you happy, but I don't think it's going to change anything." We went to our first session, and it was a disaster. The therapist asked us to talk about our feelings, and my husband just shut down. He said he didn't see the point and that he didn't believe in therapy. I felt so defeated. I realized that he wasn't willing to put in the effort to make things better. After the session, we had a huge argument. He said he was tired of my constant crying and that he couldn't handle it anymore. I told him I couldn't keep feeling unsupported and that I needed him to be there for me. He said, "Maybe we need a break. Maybe you should stay at your sister's for a while longer." I packed my things and went back to my sister's, and I felt so lost and alone. I didn't know what to do. I loved my husband, but I couldn't keep feeling this way. I started thinking about our relationship and how things had changed over the years. I remembered how he used to be so caring and patient. I wondered what had happened to that person. I talked to my sister about everything, and she reminded me of a time when we were kids, and I had a meltdown because I lost my favorite toy. She said I had always been emotional, but that didn't make my feelings any less valid. She told me I deserved to be with someone who understood and supported me, especially during such a vulnerable time. I decided to take some time for myself and think about what I wanted. I knew I couldn't keep feeling this way, but I didn't know if I was ready to give up on my marriage. I needed to figure out what was best for me and my baby. Thanks for reading. Am I the idiot for giving my girlfriend an ultimatum over her boudoir? Photo shoot with a shady photographer. My girlfriend, 22 years old, and I, 26 years old, have been together for about 3.5 years. Recently, two situations have led me to this question. First, I have always struggled with her undressing in my room while the curtains are open. For context, I live on the first floor of a university campus. People live across from me, and there is a grass field outside my window where people walk, chill, or play games somewhat regularly. Because of this, I always worry about people seeing her naked. So, whenever she undresses with the curtains open, I try to block people's view by standing in front of her or closing the curtains. I have mentioned that this feels uncomfortable for me, and she thinks it's a bit silly, but has tried to somewhat respect it. Second, she has recently had some harrowing experiences with men. This has left an enormous emotional impact on her. Mainly due to this, she said that she wants to participate in a kind of boudoir exposition. For this, she would send boudoir, nude pictures to the photographer, artist, holding the exposition, and get some money in return for it. The money is not her main goal, but a nice bonus for a student. This expo is meant for women to celebrate their bodies and feel more empowered in them. I fully support the idea of this expo, and I can understand that she wants to participate after the tough events in her life that she recently experienced. However, she asked me how I felt about this idea of hers, and I noticed that it made me feel a bit uncomfortable. This feeling felt familiar, and I think it stems from the same feeling I have in the undressing situation. The idea that another man or men has boudoir or nude pictures of her, even though she is convinced that the photographer/artist is reputable as she got his reference from a friend who is into this, makes me uncomfortable. To me, that feels like a thing that should be between us, since we're in a closed, monogamous relationship. Now I know that people can express themselves with their body, and that it doesn't necessarily have to be intimacy, and it can be artistic or meaningful instead. But still, the idea of it makes me uncomfortable, and I have expressed this to her, and she somewhat understands it, but also thinks that she should be able to do it if she wants to, also because it could help her. And even though it makes me uncomfortable, I do think that it could benefit her, so I kind of want to be okay with it, but that is apparently difficult for me. So, how do I deal with this? Now, for a few comments before the update. Comment 1. Relieve yourself of this self-appointed responsibility to protect her modesty. It's her job to protect her own modesty if she cares to. It has nothing to do with you. However, if you find that to you, this is indicative of some character traits you don't like, then that means you and she don't have shared values. She was a teenager when this relationship started, meaning that her views and morals weren't yet fully developed. So if as she's grown up, she's grown in a direction different from you, it could just mean you're no longer compatible. Comment 2. Don't listen to all these people telling you how to feel or not feel. She is free to do what she wants with her body, and you are free to feel uncomfortable about it. I suggest you sit her down and tell her gently that even though you understand where she's coming from, these feelings aren't going away. Then have a discussion from that starting point. If neither of you is willing to change, you will have to decide whether the relationship should continue or not. Now, for the update. Hey everyone, thanks for checking in. So, 2 weeks ago, my girlfriend decided to go ahead with the boudoir exposition. She was really excited about it, and I could see how much it meant to her. She spent a lot of time preparing, picking out outfits, and talking to the photographer. I tried to be supportive, even though I still felt uneasy about the whole thing. I didn't want to hold her back from something that could help her feel more empowered. The day of the photo shoot came, and she was buzzing with excitement. She left early in the morning and didn't come back until late afternoon. When she got home, she was glowing. She told me all about the experience, how the photographer made her feel comfortable, and how liberating it was to express herself in that way. I could see how happy it made her, and that made me feel a bit better about the whole thing. A few days later, she got the photos back. She showed them to me, and I have to admit, they were beautiful. The photographer did an amazing job capturing her essence. She looked confident and radiant, but as I looked at the photos, that familiar feeling of discomfort crept back in. I couldn't shake the thought of other people seeing her like that. Then, something unexpected happened. She got an email from the photographer asking if she would be interested in doing another shoot. He said that her photos were some of the best he'd ever taken, and that he wanted to feature her more prominently in the exposition. She was thrilled and immediately said yes. This time, she didn't even ask me how I felt about it. This is where things started to get complicated. I felt like my feelings were being completely disregarded. I tried to talk to her about it, but she brushed me off, saying that this was important to her, and that I needed to get over my insecurities. I felt hurt and frustrated. I wanted to support her, but I also wanted her to understand where I was coming from. A few days later, I found out something that made everything even more complicated. I was talking to a mutual friend, and she mentioned that the photographer had a bit of a reputation. Apparently, he had been involved in some questionable situations in the past, and there were rumors that he wasn't as professional as he seemed. This made me even more uncomfortable with the idea of my girlfriend working with him again. I didn't know how to bring this up with her. I didn't want to come across as controlling or paranoid, but I also didn't want her to get hurt. I decided to do some digging on my own. I found a few articles and forum posts that confirmed what our friend had said. There were several accounts of women who had felt uncomfortable during their shoots with him, and a few who had even accused him of inappropriate behavior. I knew I had to tell my girlfriend, but I was dreading the conversation. When I finally brought it up, she was furious. She accused me of trying to sabotage her and said that I was just jealous and insecure. I tried to explain that I was only looking out for her, but she wouldn't listen. She stormed out of the apartment and didn't come back for hours. When she finally returned, she was calmer, but still upset. She told me that she had talked to the photographer about the accusations, and he had assured her that they were baseless. He said that he had never done anything inappropriate, and that the women who had accused him were just trying to ruin his reputation. She believed him and said that she was still going to do the second shoot. I felt like I was at a crossroads. I didn't want to lose her, but I also couldn't ignore my gut feeling that something wasn't right. I decided to give her an ultimatum. I told her that if she went through with the second shoot, I couldn't stay in the relationship. I hated putting her in that position, but I felt like I had no other choice. She was devastated. She said that she couldn't believe I was making her choose between something that made her feel empowered and our relationship. I felt terrible, but I stood my ground. I told her that I loved her and wanted to support her, but I couldn't ignore my concerns. In the end, she decided to cancel the second shoot. She said that our relationship was more important to her than the exposition. I felt relieved, but also guilty for putting her in that position. I knew that this wasn't the end of the issue, and that we still had a lot to work through. As we talked more about it, she opened up about why the exposition was so important to her. She told me about some experiences from her past that I hadn't known about. She had struggled with body image issues for most of her life, and the boudoir photo shoot was a way for her to reclaim her confidence. She said that she felt like I didn't understand how much it meant to her, and that made her feel unsupported. I realized that I'd been so focused on my own discomfort that I hadn't really listened to her. I apologized and told her that I wanted to understand and support her. We agreed to keep talking about it and to find a way to balance her need for empowerment with my need for boundaries. Thanks for reading. If you like this video, you'll probably like these too. Also, while you're here, please consider subscribing. It's your support that keeps this channel alive and allows me to make better and longer videos. Have a great day.